There is a particular kind of pain that is almost impossible to explain to someone who hasn't felt it. Not the pain of a fight, not the pain of a breakup, not even the pain of outright rejection, which at least gives you something concrete to hold on to. Something that confirms you existed in the other person's world long enough to be pushed out of it. This is something quieter, something more disorienting. It is the pain of simply being ignored, of reaching out and hearing nothing back, of being in a room full of people and somehow still feeling invisible, of watching someone, a friend, a colleague, a person you cared about, slowly and without explanation, pull away. No argument, no falling out, no dramatic moment you can point to and say, "There, that's where it ended." Just silence. Gradual, unexplained, and total. And the worst part isn't even the silence itself. The worst part is what the silence does to you on the inside. Because when someone ignores you without reason, your mind does not sit still and accept the mystery. It goes to work. It searches. It audits every interaction, every word you said, every message you sent, every moment you can remember, looking for the crime you must have committed, looking for the reason you must deserve this. Most of the time, it finds nothing. And somehow that is worse. To understand why this happens, why people ignore others, often with no clear explanation, it is worth first understanding something about the nature of human attention itself. Because attention, it turns out, is not a neutral thing. It is not simply the byproduct of caring about someone. It is, at its core, a resource. And like all resources, it is managed, rationed, and sometimes quietly withdrawn. The psychologist, William James, writing in the late 19th century, described attention as the taking possession of the mind, in clear and vivid form, of one out of what may seem several simultaneously possible objects or trains of thought. In other words, to pay attention to something is always, simultaneously, to pay less attention to everything else. Every act of focus is also an act of exclusion. This is not a moral statement. It is simply a description of how the human mind works. We are not capable of attending to everything at once. And so, constantly and often unconsciously, we make choices about what deserves our energy, our presence, our response. Most of these choices are never examined. They happen beneath the surface of conscious awareness, driven by forces the person making them might not even be able to name. And this is perhaps the first and most important thing to understand about being ignored. In many cases, the person doing the ignoring is not making a calculated, deliberate decision about you. They are simply following the invisible current of their own attention, which has shifted for reasons that may have very little to do with you at all. This does not make it hurt less, but it does begin to change what the hurt means. There is a concept in psychology known as social pain, studied extensively by researcher Naomi Eisenberger and her colleagues at UCLA. Social pain refers to the distress caused by the experience of social exclusion, rejection, or disconnection. What Eisenberger's research revealed, in findings that surprised even her, was that social pain activates the same neural regions as physical pain. The same areas of the brain that light up when you burn your hand or break a bone also light up when you feel socially excluded. In one study, participants played a simple computer game called Cyberball, a virtual ball-tossing game, while undergoing brain scans. When other players in the game began excluding a participant by no longer throwing the ball to them, the participant's brain registered this exclusion in the same regions associated with physical hurt, even though the other players were strangers, even though it was only a game, even though the participant knew intellectually that it was a minor and meaningless social slight. The brain, it turns out, does not easily distinguish between the sting of a wound and the sting of being left out. Both register as threats. Both demand a response. This is not a flaw in human wiring. It is, in fact, a feature, an ancient one. For most of human evolutionary history, Belonging to a group was not merely a social preference. It was a matter of survival. To be excluded from the tribe was, in many real and immediate senses, to be left to die. And so the brain evolved to treat social rejection with the same alarm it treats physical danger, because for a very long time they amounted to the same thing. What this means is that when someone ignores you and it feels unbearable, when it feels disproportionately painful relative to the apparent insignificance of the act, you are not being dramatic. You are not being weak or oversensitive. You are experiencing a deeply wired, evolutionarily ancient alarm system doing precisely what it was designed to do, telling you that something important has been disrupted, that a connection you depended on has gone quiet. The question is not whether the alarm is justified. The question is what you do with it. But this still does not fully answer the central mystery. Why do people ignore others? Sometimes people they once cared about, people they were close to, people who did nothing demonstrably wrong. The answer, uncomfortable as it is, tends to fall into one of several categories, and none of them are particularly clean or satisfying. The first is avoidance of discomfort. Human beings are, on balance, extraordinarily averse to difficult conversations, to confrontation, to the discomfort of telling someone something they do not want to hear. And so, rather than having the conversation, rather than saying I need space, or something has changed for me, or I don't think this friendship is working anymore, many people simply go quiet. They allow the distance to grow. They answer messages less. They become gradually, inexplicably unavailable. And they tell themselves, perhaps, that this is gentler, that silence is kinder than clarity, that fading is less painful than ending. It is almost never true. The second is that people are, more often than we acknowledge, overwhelmed. The modern world has produced a kind of social overload that previous generations simply did not face. Hundreds of contacts, dozens of ongoing conversations, the persistent, low-grade pressure of being reachable and responsive at all times. For many people, managing these social demands is genuinely exhausting. And when something in their inner life becomes destabilized, when they are anxious or depressed or drowning in something they have not told anyone about, the connections that feel safest to let go are sometimes the ones that feel most secure. The people they trust most to still be there later, after the storm passes. This is its own kind of backwards compliment. It is still painful, but it is worth knowing. The third category is perhaps the hardest to sit with. Sometimes people pull away because the relationship for them has simply run its course. Not because of anything that happened, not because of anything you did or failed to do, but because people change. Because the version of themselves that needed or valued that connection has shifted into someone new, and the new version does not know how to explain this, or does not think they owe an explanation, and so they say nothing. Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote that hell is other people, but he was perhaps only half right. The other half of hell is the story we tell ourselves about other people, the narratives we construct in their silence, the meanings we pour into the gaps they leave behind. The philosopher and essayist Simone Weil wrote something that seems, at first, to be about attention in a spiritual sense, but which cuts much deeper than that. She wrote that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity, that to truly attend to another person, to really see them, to hold space for their reality, is one of the most difficult and most profound things a human being can offer another. If Weil is right, then what its withdrawal communicates is not simply indifference. It communicates, at a level beneath words, the message that you are no longer worth that generosity, that the resource of someone's full and present attention has been redirected. And because attention is so tied to worth, because we are wired from infancy to equate being seen with being valued, its withdrawal lands not just as a social slight, but as something that touches the very foundations of how we understand ourselves. This is why being ignored can shake a person's sense of identity in a way that seems far out of proportion to what actually happened. It is not really about the unanswered message or the unreturned call. It is about what those things seem to confirm about who you are and whether you matter. And here is where it is essential, not just useful, not just comforting, but genuinely essential, to make a distinction between what someone's behavior says about them and what it says about you. There is a concept in cognitive psychology known as the fundamental attribution error. It describes a consistent and well-documented tendency in human thinking. When we try to explain other people's behavior, we overweight internal factors, their character, their intentions, their feelings toward us, and underweight external factors, their circumstances, their inner state, the invisible pressures of their own life. We assume, in other words, that what people do is mostly a reflection of who they are and how they feel, when in reality, what people do is at least as much a reflection of where they are, emotionally, psychologically, situationally. When someone ignores you, the mind almost automatically reaches for an internal explanation. They don't like me. I did something wrong. I am too much, or not enough, or somehow off in a way I cannot identify. The fundamental attribution error pulls you toward making it about you, about your worth, about your adequacy. But the far more likely truth, in most cases, is external. They are managing something. They are afraid of something. They are lost inside their own life in a way that has nothing to do with the value you hold. And their silence, however it feels, is a reflection of their own limitations, not yours. This does not mean the silence doesn't hurt. It does. It will. But there is a meaningful difference between pain that carries information and pain that carries a verdict. Being ignored is the former. It is information about another person's capacity, their circumstances, their fears. It is almost never a verdict about your worth. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, writing nearly 2,000 years ago, drew one of the most quietly radical distinctions in the history of human thought. He divided all of existence into two categories: things that are within our control and things that are not. Within our control, he suggested, are our thoughts, our judgments, our responses, our character. Outside our control is virtually everything else, including, crucially, how other people treat us, including who chooses to see us and who does not. He did not say this to produce resignation. He said it to produce freedom. Because the moment you stop trying to control what is fundamentally uncontrollable, the interior world of another person, their attention, their affections, their reasons for silence, you recover something. You recover the energy you were spending on a problem that was never yours to solve. The people who ignore you are navigating their own inner terrain. You cannot see it. You cannot fully know it. And you almost certainly cannot change it by trying harder, reaching out more, or auditing yourself into a more acceptable version of who you already are. What you can do, what remains entirely within your domain, is decide what meaning you assign to the silence. Decide whether it is evidence of your unworthiness or evidence of someone else's limitation. Decide whether to let it define you or simply let it pass through you, the way all things eventually pass. There is something else worth naming, something that tends to go unspoken in conversations about being ignored, perhaps because it is uncomfortable in a different direction. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the silence is a mirror. Not in the punishing sense of you deserved it, but in the more honest sense that relationships require maintenance, presence, reciprocity. And it is worth asking, quietly and without self-flagellation, whether the connection had been tended to, whether the attention had been mutual, whether the other person had perhaps felt unseen themselves long before you felt it. This is not about blame. It is about the recognition that most relationships are not lost in a single moment. They are lost gradually, in the accumulation of small, missed connections, unanswered gestures, conversations that never quite reached the depth they were quietly asking for. To wonder about this is not weakness. It is the kind of honest self-examination that makes a person more capable of genuine connection, not less. Ultimately, being ignored is one of the more clarifying experiences a person can have. Not because it feels good, it doesn't, but because it has a way of revealing what actually holds, of showing you who shows up, who stays consistent, who offers their attention without you having to perform for it or earn it again and again. The philosopher and psychologist William James once wrote that the deepest principle in human nature is the craving to be appreciated. He was right. That craving does not go away. It should not go away. It is part of what makes us reach toward each other at all. But perhaps the work, the quiet, lifelong work, is learning to be a reliable source of that appreciation for yourself. Not in a way that closes you off to others. Not in a way that makes you indifferent to connection, but in a way that means your sense of worth does not rise and fall entirely on whether someone answers your message. Because the people who ignore you are not the authors of your story. They are, at most, a chapter, and chapters end. New ones begin, and the story continues, carried forward by the only person who was there for every word of it.